Welcome back to the Good Girl Deprogramming podcast. I'm Michelle Minnikin, and I'm thrilled to have you join me today as we dive into one of the most crucial topics we'll cover on the show: coercive control. In fact, this is the foundation my work is based on. This was supposed to be last week's podcast, but I had a particularly bad period, which actually coincided with a massive full moon. Yes, that's the technical term. So I wasn't in the right frame of mind to record, so I had a bit of a wobble. I know I could have recorded it in advance, but I didn't. And instead of dragging myself upstairs to do it when I really didn't want to, I realised that this is my bloody podcast and I can do whatever I want. So I have 6 podcasts already recorded, so I brought Vicky's forward a couple of weeks. So now, before we dive into today's topic, I thought it'd be quite cool to have a quick recap of the podcasts even released since my last solo show. And now, so in episode 4, I spoke to the lovely Don Ryan about how our books were essentially the same, discussing the harm our upbringing as girls or boys has had on us. We explored how men who learn to suppress their emotions face devastatingly high suicide rates. We also talked about healthy masculinity and how men can support women. In episode 5, I talked to my WTF, which is Women Talking Facts, co-host Felice Ailing, on an emergency podcast triggered by the awful things happening to women in September. We mostly talked about the impacts of misogyny and the need for more men to get involved. And then in episode 6, I chatted with Dana Byfield about understanding ourselves, our relationship with work, and our significant other relationships. Dana also introduced the idea of different personality types and their impact on leadership and personal growth. Then in episode 7, Vicky Campbell and I discussed the challenges of being a good girl at work, highlighting the emotional toll of masking our true selves. Vicky shared her experiences with ADHD and people-pleasing, as well as the importance of being authentic, even in corporate settings. And then in my last solo episode, we explored good girl conditioning, how many of us are subtly and sometimes not so subtly taught to be obedient, polite, and to always put others first. We unpacked what it means to be a good girl in society and how it affects our thoughts, emotions, and behaviours. But today, we're going to take a step further by talking about coercive control. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly is coercive control and how does it tie into how women are conditioned? So coercive control is often associated with abusive relationships and high control environments like cults. It's a form of manipulation that isn't always visible, but it's incredibly powerful. So coercive control is about shaping a person's behavior, identity, and self-worth through tactics like isolation, guilt, shame, and fear. And when you think about it, these same tactics are often used by society to keep women in line and maintain the status quo. So today I want to help you understand how these dynamics play out in our everyday lives, from the subtle comments that make us question our worth to the unspoken rules about what's acceptable for women to think, feel, and say. We're going to shed a light on the hidden forces that shape our experiences and start the journey towards breaking free from them. So, to understand coercive control more deeply, let's look at a framework developed by sociologist Albert Biderman. So in the 1950s, Biderman created the chart of coercion. He used it originally to describe the psychological manipulation tactics employed to break down prisoners of war. And his research highlighted methods of control in extreme situations like torture and interrogation. But what's fascinating and alarming is that these same tactics are present in everyday situations to control and limit women's behaviours. So, as we go through these, I want you to think about your own life. Have you ever felt subtly isolated or manipulated? Maybe it wasn't obvious at the time, but looking back, were you made to feel different if you didn't fit into traditional gender roles or standards? Take a moment to reflect on this. Like literally pause the podcast if you want to have a think. So the chart of coercion identifies 8 methods, including isolation, induced exhaustion, and enforced trivial demands, which all create compliance and subjugation. Plus, the precursor to this, establishing trust. There's the elements that make up each of the 7 chapters of my book. So I'm going to put in the show notes a table for all of these and how Biderman's methods apply to women. So effectively, these tools of coercion operate through 3 main primary strategies. 1, social isolation, 2, strategic exhaustion, and 3, which is threats. So social isolation is a powerful tool that keeps individuals physically or emotionally separated from others, making them feel alone and powerless. When people are cut off from their support systems, whether through subtle tactics like discouraging collaboration or outright manipulation, they become easier to control. In the context of good girl conditioning, women are often pitted against each other, encouraged to compete rather than to support each other. This isolation weakens collective resistance and reinforces societal norms that keep us in line. And then we've got the tactics of strategic exhaustion, another method used to weaken mental and physical ability to resist. So this can manifest as the overwhelming pressure to meet impossible standards. So constantly working to be perfect in both professional and personal lives. Women particularly are often expected to work like they don't have families and parent like they don't have careers, leading to burnout. And even if you don't have children, you're expected to do way more than your fair share of caring responsibilities, both at home, in the community, amongst friends, at work. And all of this various methods of keeping us tired dulls our capacity to challenge the systems that oppress us. Because, you know, if women had way more energy, we could like literally fight this stuff, but we don't because of all of the tools that are used against us. And then finally, threats, whether explicit or implied, cultivate anxiety and despair. And the scary thing about these tools of coercion, you don't actually have to be on the receiving end of violence. But if we see, for example, other women stepping out, speaking up, and see them getting torn down, that keeps us quiet too. So threats of social exclusion, losing professional opportunities, or being labelled as difficult keep us compliant, making it difficult to step outside our societal expectations without fearing the consequences. So in each of the forthcoming solo episodes, so every 3 or 4 podcasts, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these chapters and bring out some stories and tell you about some bits or through each of these 9 methods of coercion. So the next podcast obviously is going to be about establishing trust, and then we'll go on and go on. But just as a little taster, social isolation. So as I said before, women are often isolated in very subtle ways and encouraged to compete with each other rather than collaborate, or made to feel like they're different if they don't conform. And this isolation weakens our ability to build supportive networks, and that effectively keeping us playing small. Another one, control of information. So it's all about the messages that we've received from a young age, through the media, through school, through family, about what's appropriate for women. So these messages shape how we behave, limiting our self-expression and sense of possibility. And I think one of the most traumatic ones is this one called humiliation and I can't even say it. Humiliation and degradation. There we go. I got there in the end. So have you ever been told that you're too loud, too assertive, or too ambitious? So again, these comments might seem small, but over time that they compound, they build up, effectively eroding your confidence and making you question your right to even take up space. So I'll share a little personal example here. So in my own career, I was once labelled as a boss as being difficult at work for simply expressing my needs and opinions. Like, how dare I? And this was in the pre-knowing about ADHD times. Could you imagine me being in work knowing what I know now? I don't think any bosses would really, really love managing me. Just say that. Another time when I may or may not have been sacked. Still don't know whether I left or was sacked, but that's by the by. In that last meeting with my manager at the time, she asked me why I wasn't more of a bitch. She was expecting me to be more of a bitch. And I was like, huh? I was never told to be a bitch. I was not even given the authority to be in a bitch. I was told everything was all about like collaboration and consensus. And then obviously when that didn't happen, I wasn't able to do my job. So I found that a really rather confusing question. Anyway, so due to all of these scenarios, all of these subtle and not so subtle methods of keeping us in line, keeping us behaving, me and women around me, we internalize these messages and we kind of turn it in. So we're the problem, question our self-worth, and our capability. So it wasn't until I recognized these patterns for what they were. So it wasn't until I went with that, that aim of understanding how we are trained to be good girls. It wasn't until I had downloaded Biderman's chart for coercion and written all over it that I realized that these are all the subtle and not so subtle ways of keeping us behaving. So it wasn't until I did that and wrote the book, clearly, which had a big, strong, wake-up call for me to deprogram my good girl conditioning, that I was able to reclaim my voice and understand what happens and actively work against it, because all of this is habitual. We do this all every day in, day out. So does this resonate with you? Have you ever caught yourself apologizing in meetings for saying something that didn't warrant an apology? It's like, oh, I'm sorry to say this, but, or, can I just have a moment of your time? Or somebody bumps into you and you're the one that apologizes. Or my favorite at the moment, have you noticed if you just sit and watch people walking down the street, the women with, the women without prams, because we know we use prams as battering rams sometimes, but women tend to get out the way of the men. The men generally tend to walk straight down the street, and the women sort of move around them. And we don't do that actively. We do that as a habit. So next time we just stand and watch in like a high street, just watch, and it is absolutely fascinating. So that constant need to apologize and soften our presence isn't a coincidence, it's conditioning. And it keeps us from being seen as too demanding or too bossy or too much of a bitch or whatever. And because we've had all of these messages throughout our life, this leads us to having this internalized coercive control, because we've been conditioned for so long, and we're policing ourselves. And we probably all have a voice in our head that says, oh, I shouldn't ask for that promotion, or am I being selfish for wanting time to myself, or everyone's going to judge me, no one's going to like me. That is a result of all of this conditioning. So obviously this is where a lot of us struggle. We often don't realize that we are limiting ourselves, but recognizing it is the first step to breaking free. So I'm going to talk you through a couple of practical steps to start beginning to dismantle these tactics. So step one is to identify the patterns. Start paying attention to where you feel constrained or silenced, and keep a note of those moments that can help you spot recurring patterns. So is it with a particular person or a particular scenario, or, is it at work or is it at home? Is it with strangers? Is it with family members? For me, I've still got this weird hang up about people in authority. So, medical people, police people. Not that I have a lot of contact with police people, but those people with like authority, I still struggle. But I know I do it now, so I kind of, make sure that I understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and I'm able to say my piece when I need to. Then step two is to challenge the inner critic. So when you catch yourself thinking self-critical thoughts, like we all do, ask yourself, would I talk to a friend or loved one this way? If the answer is no, try to reframe that thought with kindness. I know, easier said than done. I will go much, much more into detail about this one on a later podcast. And then step three is to set boundaries. Start small, like saying, I need some time to myself, and work towards setting larger boundaries in both your personal and professional life. I'm saying this and realizing that this wouldn't have gone down well with me in the past. I wish I had £1 for every time somebody had said to me in my life that, Michelle, you just need better boundaries. You need more boundaries. And I was like, but how do you even get them? Where do you get them? Can you buy them in Tesco's with your, your weekly groceries? And like, no. So I used to really get really frustrated about this one. So my number one hint in here is to notice when you have feelings of being resentful, because that feeling of resentment is a really key indicator that your boundaries are being squished, squashed, moved, overstepped. So just notice that feeling, and then you'll go, that is my boundary being bulldozed. So I think that's the first step. So all of this stuff, the first step is in noticing. And then my number one tip for anyone looking to do this work is don't do it alone. Find your tribe, find your women, connect with people who understand what you're going through, because isolation is such an effective tactic of coercive control. So gather the women, build a community, start a WhatsApp group for some like-minded friends, and because we need to start taking back our own power. Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to mention a couple of resources that might help you. Of course, my book, Good Girl Deprogramming, dives deeper into these tactics with exercises, reflection questions to help you break free. But also, you can take the Good Girl quiz on my website to see where conditioning might be still influencing you. So I created the quiz because I realized that not everybody, because of all of these ways that society keeps women tired, not everybody will have the time to read a book with 84,000 words in. So the quiz was there to figure out quickly which chapters would be best for which women. So you do the quiz and it'll tell you where you're struggling in terms of those coercive control chapters. And even doing the quiz is a good reflection exercise. You don't have to buy the book. It'll give you some tips. So yes, so that, and obviously if you're looking for more personalized support, don't hesitate to get in touch with a coach like me, or a therapist, psychologist. Of course, there are many of us around. And I'd also love to hear from you. So tell me, have you experienced this type of coercive control in your life? So you can send me a message on one of the social platforms that are in the show notes, or comment on Spotify with your thoughts or questions. I'd love to start a conversation about this. So thank you for joining me today. Just by listening, I think you've taken a huge step towards recognizing these patterns and regaining control of your own story. And I am so excited that we've got some incredible guests coming up in the next few weeks. So stay tuned and remember, you have the power to reshape your narrative. So until next time, be kind to yourself. And then he said, and each other. I'm sure that was a very popular popular show in the 90s. Can't remember who it was, but yes. But yes, challenge all of those narratives, all of those internal thoughts, or bits of feedback that don't serve you, and stay strong. So thank you.